how lucky we are that Trump was deceived. I'll explain my point about why in a brief 20 minutes. I'm saying that we were incredibly lucky that all of us, and Trump too, of course, were deceived in the 2020 election. But first, not about why we were lucky, but confirmation that Trump was, as always, right, and we really were deceived.
Completely destroying the American democratic process. It was almost as if he was describing elections in Zimbabwe or something happening in Belarus. Accusations of fraud coming from the president's mouth, almost all of them are unfounded. He talks about lawsuits. He also mentions some cases of fraud that he attributes, including, let me focus on just one since there were so many. He mentioned a leaking water pipe in Georgia, where, as shown at the bottom of the screen, things are getting more complicated for the president, a leaking water pipe. According to him, this led to the suspension of one of the charges, and then he said that a lot happened.
I want to draw attention to how small the numbers are between victory and defeat in individual states. Here, for example, in the state of Georgia, after some unclear ballots appeared from who knows where, Trump was leading. Still leading by 3,635, and then more and more ballots kept coming in. And the supposedly sleepy, long-since crazy Biden ended up ahead. Continued. Remember this number. All the polls showed that Trump was supposed to win in Georgia, and by a margin, and he was winning. But suddenly at night, supposedly some pipe broke, and because of that, the water was shut off. So everyone was sent home until morning, but who stayed and kept counting? Suddenly, Biden received a flood of new ballots, seemingly endless, to be continued. Trump called the Republican Secretary of State and asked him where these votes came from and asked, "Is there really no way to find our votes, our ballots? Are you sure?" This became the basis for a high-profile case about pressure, about an attempt to overturn the election results, in which there was so much deception. In this case, there was so much deception and forgery that it had to be closed as a matter of secrecy. They directed it from the White House, but failed. It was all too obviously stitched together, so to speak. Everything was sewn with white threads. By the way, the prosecutor in Fulton County, Fani Willis, everyone already knows her, I hope. The whole world, not just our country where all this happened. In this county, people are now being tried for forgery, fraud, theft, including the Secretary of State. So the Republican, as I already said, immediately betrayed, or rather sold out, Trump and a dirty and nasty court case began, which cost Trump a lot of money, time, and health. So the courts and public opinion, which was naturally shaped in the United States by the media, didn't let the Trump supporters get to the truth, but the truth came out anyway. Look, so many years have passed, and yet it still came out. So remember, Trump was short by 11,779 votes. And now let's move forward to December 2025. Well, there are about 10.5 months left until the congressional and Senate elections of the next year, 2026.
Well, President Trump was right. He was right again. I wish I had a sign saying President Trump was right about everything, but here I am with this wonderful Make America Great Again cap. Guys, there is huge news coming out about election integrity, about fraud, and we're going to dive into that right now. This is amazing. Look, this is going to really alarm you. So it turns out that in Fulton County, that's where District Attorney Fani Willis tried to put the president in prison for hundreds of years just for asking. We counted all the ballots, checked if everything was done correctly. Well, now Fulton County, Georgia is forced to admit that 315,000 ballots were not signed in the 2020 election.
Did you understand what happened? In this very Fulton County, not 11,779, but 315,000. The ballots didn't have a receiving signature, which means they had no right to be counted. And what does that mean? It means
they literally don't know who these people are. Fulton County, Georgia, informed the Georgia State Election Board on December 9 that it does not dispute the fact that the ballot scanner tapes for about 315,000 ballots cast in 2020 did not have the required signature of a poll worker. District Attorney N. Brambo admitted that this was a violation of the rule in a report on the investigation conducted by the Georgia Secretary of State. It was later confirmed that 36 out of 37 early voting precincts did not sign the vote count protocols as required by law. Nevertheless, the overall results were still counted, which ultimately secured Biden's victory.
let's take another look at the numbers. So Trump lost by 11,779 votes, but 315,000 ballots were fake, meaning, well, fake or not fake, they couldn't be counted. So that's 315,000 minus 11,779. It turned out that Trump won by 303,221 votes. That's the number by which Trump won. The state of Georgia, which, by the way, matches the public opinion polls, or is actually even less than the predicted Republican win. So, who won Georgia in 2020, and which other states did Trump win? Continuation. And the plan prepared by the Democrats included putting such pressure on the judges that not 1 out of 60 agreed to even take the case for consideration. That's very Bolshevik. That's very Leninist.
Look at this affidavit. Marka Wingate from Georgia, a member of the Fulton County Board of Registration and Elections, informed the board that Fulton County did not conduct any signature verification on absentee ballots mailed in during the 2020 election. So they didn't check anything. They didn't take any action to make sure that this election was absolutely fair. They called President Trump a liar. They claimed that he was trying to rig the election. Now we find out that they didn't do any signature verification at all. So these clowns from Georgia blatantly lied to the American people, and they didn't even bother to check anything. And so hundreds of thousands of ballots just come in. They don't even check them. They don't even look to see if they were from an illegal immigrant, or generated by a computer, or mailed in from China. Much more about this will be known soon. I would really like to tell you, but I spoke with a high-ranking person in the armed forces who made it clear to me that something very serious is coming. And I would really like to tell you more.
Like you, I miss open trials, cases, charges, and punishments. On the other hand, I understand that it's a very complex and lengthy process from suspicion and certainty even to the evidence that a court or jury would consider as 100% confirmation of our suspicions. After all, they hid them, they concealed them, they put pressure on people, on judges at least. And here is one of the stars of American television. I'm sure you know this face. It's Kelsey Grammer, who starred in Chips, Cheers, and Frasier.
I remember when Jane Fonda was talking about the lockdown and COVID-19, she said, if we can't figure out how to remove this president with the pandemic and everything we have, all the power and mail-in ballots, she said it out loud. She said, well, then we're ridiculous. We're like fools. We're not capable of winning elections. And she was right. But that's what they needed to win. And then they needed to open the borders and bring in enough people to win elections. I never believed Democrats would support this.
Watching those electoral practices they've implemented here in California to allow absolutely anyone to vote, as long as they're walking in their heartbeats, it's astonishing. They don't care if it's illegal.
Not at all. They even want people without a pulse who are still on the list to vote and let them vote multiple times.
But I came to my polling station during the 2020 election and said, listen, I thought I'd just bring this. This is my absentee ballot. I wanted to bring it and make sure you received it. The girl looked at me and said, she pressed a couple of buttons and said, oh, that's illegal. Your ballot is invalid.
And it's invalid. I asked why, and she said, no reason. You can fill out a provisional ballot if you want. I said, okay. I reached into my pocket and said, let me give you my identification. And she said, oh, no, I'm prohibited by law from taking your identification. I thought it was a mix-up, and about a year and a half later, I got a notice that my ballot wasn't counted.
His vote wasn't counted either, but the votes of tens of thousands of illegals who went to vote were. It probably costs about $20 plus a sandwich usually. Maybe they added a Coke too. They were welcomed gladly. And here's what Mark Lindell, the businessman, who is already planning, I think he has already filed to run for governor. He's a businessman, as I already said, and he's a well-known person. He created a very large marketing company, television. His face was always on the screen, so he's kind of famous. Here's what he says about the Democrats.
That if our voting platforms are secure, if I were in their place, I would say we need to get rid of all of them. You need to choose something, maybe something traditional, go a completely different route with a traditional approach, but like in the good old days, a democratic one. What if there's someone who would be somewhere in the middle where we used to have normal politics, if that ever really existed? If they nominate any of them in a regular election, they'll lose. I mean, they're so far from common sense, I haven't seen any of them. It's like how, it's just unthinkable. If you look back 10 or 20 years ago and said, look at what you're going to have. Here it's for the Democratic Party. These far left, crazy, senseless things, which I think you understand, but you know what? They take them and then suddenly they all change at the last minute. Oh, now I'm common sense. Oh yeah, I wasn't part of those transvestites, transgender people, and 3 bathrooms, and men's and women's rooms. I wasn't part of that. You know, they won't be able to deny it. So I think you need someone almost completely nameless, because I think 90 of them completely ruined themselves by no.
I agree. Without the fraud, Democrats wouldn't have won in those blue states and cities. It's just fraud.
No, it's just fraud. And you know,
as you said, with what's coming up, it's already softened. They're finished. What will they do? They're bad and won't give up.
Yeah, no, they won't give up. I don't know what they'll do. But here's what we know, Alex. My cyber guys and all that. Remember, I had complete records for half the country for 2020, and in 2022 for 1/3, almost 1/3 of the country. We couldn't find a place with complete CAZ records, which, by the way, is a full CAZ record. Friends, either it shows computer manipulation or there's no middle. And that doesn't necessarily mean the elections were rigged, but there's no middle. Either it shows computer manipulation or it doesn't. We didn't find a single district in the 2020 elections anywhere in the state or the country that wasn't rigged, you know, in the 2022 elections. We did find something, though. Most of them were in Florida, actually. I think absolutely everything we found was in Florida. There was absolutely no computer manipulation. DeSantis won Miami-Dade County by about 12 points, a place never won before. You said your team studied this and were impressed. The big increase happened because there was no computer manipulation. We simply extrapolated those numbers. We now have an example of what life was like across America without computers, when everything was on paper and there was no computer processing. So if we did that, Alex, either first or the numbers showed that 60% of this country was red. That means your purple regions became red, your bright red ones were as red as possible, and your California was, well, maybe purple. Do you get what I mean? So those deep inner cities that you think are blue, no, they're purple. This country is 65% red.
Lindell claims that, according to polls, if there were no election manipulation, 65% of the country would be right of center, so to speak. That is, as we say here, red, but it's not exactly the same red as in the Soviet Union, 65%. In other words, they're close to the Republicans, and the Democrats can't win unless they cheat, forge, and steal votes. And now let's listen to Daily Signal, who were shocked by these 315,000 fraudulent ballots. Tommy Kennett is a very well-known journalist. He explains everything in detail.
Fulton County, Georgia, you remember? During the 2020 election, what were you told? If you suggest that there might have been fake ballots or illegal ballots or unverified ballots that were counted in that election, then you're a conspiracy theorist, you're a traitor, you're probably going to hell, and so is everyone you know, and you should be ashamed for questioning democracy. So, what now? Fulton County, Georgia has admitted the following. We do not dispute the fact that 315,000 ballots which lacked any signatures from polling station workers were counted in 2020 according to election law. Georgia requires, without any ifs, buts, or other excuses, no exceptions, that an election commission worker, a judge, a Republican judge, and a Democrat judge carefully examine the ballot, determine that yes, this is indeed a legitimate ballot, and then sign it to certify it. That's a mistake. It's mandatory, which is exactly why it's required. In the state of Georgia, ever since the Reconstruction era, this has been of great importance to the federal government, especially in the southern states that were once part of the Confederacy. Election laws are very, very specific to make sure everything is verified. And because, essentially, what had been happening for about a century and a half in Chicago has now become, or rather, back then, was a problem for Georgia. So, although the federal government was able to prevent some types of fraud, an article by the Federalist and election correspondent Brian Lyman, a friend of our show, reports this. This admission occurred at a December 9 hearing before the Georgia State Election Board, following a challenge by David Cross. He is a local activist fighting for election integrity who filed a complaint with the State Election Board in March 2022, claiming that Fulton County violated Georgia law in handling early voting before the November 2020 election by counting hundreds of thousands of ballots, even though poll workers did not sign the tally sheets, which are crucial for the certification process. So Fulton County has now officially admitted that yes, this is indeed the case. 315,000 ballots without a single signature, without any real process, without a verification process, absolutely nothing, were just pushed through.
There you go. I think you got a detailed and clear explanation of what was happening. The law of the state of Georgia does not provide for an automatic exchange of already certified results, especially since Biden is no longer even in power. Democrats claim that the lack of verification does not mean fraud. It just means there was no verification. But they couldn't be accepted without verification. And now it's already impossible to know who actually voted, which might really be the case. So what does this mean for those who did it either out of negligence or intentionally? Let's, as they say, give them a choice, even though you and I are almost certain we know. So they slip these ballots into the general pile for us. The Democrats will fight to their last breath to make sure electronic voting is never canceled. Where can all of this actually be done? The Democrats claim that requiring identification there, cleaning up the voter lists, minimizing mail-in voting, reducing the number of votes, and reducing the number of days when you can vote. All of this somehow affects the poor, the elderly, students, minorities, and reduces the turnout of legitimate voters. The Democrats claim that 10% of the population doesn't have identification, or rather, maybe they do, but it's expired, and renewing it takes, as they say, time, money, and effort. On the other hand, without an identification, you can't fly on airplanes. Well, maybe not everyone flies. But you can't enter a courthouse. You can't get the necessary certificate from a federal agency. At the bank, you won't be given a large sum of money. Maybe not everyone needs large sums, let's say from $5,000 and up. If you don't confirm who you are, without identification, you can't buy alcohol or tobacco. Here, I think that 10 is seriously exaggerated. It's unlikely that 10% of the population doesn't buy alcohol or tobacco. You can't open a bank account, you won't be able to rent housing. By the way, you can't buy housing, you can't buy a car, you won't be able to rent a car, you won't get food stamps. So boom, here you go. The poorest people. How do they get food stamps if they don't have identification? Even though that's the first thing they ask for, they require it and everything else. You won't be able to get health insurance, even government insurance. You won't be able to get a job. You won't be able to book a hotel room. A lot of prescription medications at the pharmacy require identification. Do you still believe that 10% of America's population, that's 35 million people, supposedly don't open bank accounts, don't buy medicine, don't rent or buy housing, don't get married, don't register their children, and don't receive government programs like Medicare and Medicaid? Personally, I think this conversation is about illegal immigrants, whom the Democrats playfully call the undocumented. Documented migrants, as if changing the term actually changes the meaning. That's what they believe. And we don't want them voting for anyone. We don't care. They're voting on how much money to take from us and what laws to pass in the United States. If we don't jail everyone who rigged the elections, everything will stay exactly the same. Nothing will change. We need trials, high-profile ones, serious punishments so that all potential violators know it won't be easy for them, not at all. And for now, ladies and gentlemen, we were right again. There really were violations, and indeed, it looks like Trump won, and by quite a significant margin. Now I'll clarify my statement that we were lucky that the 2020 election was, well, rigged, yes. Adjusted, manipulated. First, for 4 years, people saw who the Democrats really are. During this time, the Democratic Party split into rabid communists and thieves-in-law. By thieves, I mean those who are satisfied with our system because it allows them to rob us, so to speak, legally. By in-law, I mean elected officials, Congress, the Senate, mayors, governors, and local government. Secondly, Trump got 4 years already knowing Washington from the inside to prepare a plan, assemble a team, and think through the steps to carry out that plan. So sometimes it turns out badly. Congratulations to everyone on this special occasion.